The research report task is now available on Blackboard in the assessment section within the report folder. You will need to download both the task sheet and the Excel data file, as well as the criteria sheet that must be attached to your report when submitted. The aim of this assessment task is to give you the opportunity to apply the data analysis skills that you are learning to some real-life data. The topic this semester is superannuation. Your task sheet gives some background information. You may also wish to do some general background reading to gain a better understanding of superannuation within Australia. A Google search will very quickly provide some places to look for more information. In relation to the data you'll be analysing, there is one set of data consisting of 6 columns. The data can be found in an Excel file available for download near the task sheet on Blackboard. The dataset contains detailed information relating to 486 superannuation fund options. This data has been sourced from selectingsuper.com.au. The dataset includes the following variables: fund name, investment type, segment, can anyone join, 1-year return, and 3-year return. As a research officer, you have been asked to summarise, analyse, and interpret the data. The task sheet includes quite a specific list of tasks which must go into the report. A terminology worksheet has been included in the Excel file to help you become familiar with various superannuation terms. If you are not familiar with any of the terminology used in this assessment item, we would highly recommend that you undertake some general reading on this topic. Most superannuation fund websites will have such information. As well, there are many online dictionaries which can be searched to define terms. There is also an investment types worksheet within the Excel file that has information to help with your understanding of the different investment type options, including their risk classification. Okay, so let's start by looking at the overall structure of the report which you will prepare. There will be more research report help recordings, and so we will have the chance to talk more about the statistical aspects, but for the moment it is important to have an understanding of the report we are trying to prepare. It is important that your report is structured as a business report and appropriately formatted. You should therefore include a title page. When you submit your report to Assignment Minder, you will need to complete an Assignment Minder cover sheet to attach to your folder, and so this will include more detail. As such, the title page only needs to include a report title, your name, and student number, but feel free to be a bit creative with the title page. The table of contents goes after the title page. But so in terms of the report itself, where do we start? Well, all good reports should have an introduction section, and so this is where we begin. The introduction is your opportunity to set the scene for the report, and so the first few sentences are likely to be in relation to the general topic. Maybe some background information, followed by a sentence to explain why we are interested in the topic and therefore what the objective of the report is. Please keep in mind that nowhere in the task sheet have you been asked to select the best superannuation fund, but rather your aim is to develop an understanding of superannuation performance during the last financial year, what we might refer to as a review of the superannuation industry. The introduction should also include some specific details about the data that you'll be analysing, as well as a brief outline of the report structure to follow. A concluding sentence is always a good way to finish off a section. Overall, your introduction should be a small paragraph. While we might be tempted to then go straight into the full analysis, there is one more issue that should be dealt with early and therefore can be included as a section straight after the introduction. It will only be a fairly small section of the report, but it is important. Before we do any analysis of data, we should consider the possibility of outliers. As we have seen during the lectures, their presence can cause numerical measures to be distorted. The idea is therefore to consider the possibility of outliers before undertaking any of the analysis, and an early section within the report is therefore logical so as to make clear that this analysis has been included, and therefore to clearly define the data set that will be used for the remainder of the report. In terms of calculations, you only need to consider the possibility of outliers for the 1-year returns data. If you do find any outliers, you will need to then think about whether to leave them within the set or remove them completely such that the whole row would be deleted. In the report, your outlier section will begin with an intro sentence, basically introducing the idea of an outlier and explaining why they need to be considered. You can state what data was tested for outliers and refer the reader of your report to an appendix with a summary of the calculations. State your findings, and if you do find outliers, you will need to finish off the section by stating what was done with them, as well as the motivation behind the decision. In relation to the appendix, it can be fairly simple, and I would recommend including an intro sentence, maybe with the Z-score formula and a statement of the outlier rule. It would then be useful to include a small table showing some examples of the Z-score calculations. Having the outlier discussion out of the way, we can now go to the specific tasks and therefore the main sections of this report. While ultimately it is up to you to decide how to best order the tasks within the report, one structure idea would be to complete the main sections in the same order listed in the task sheet. It is important to think about the overall structure of the report and if it flows logically. Thinking now about the distribution of 1-year returns. You will need to initially consider the distribution of 1-year returns in isolation, which is one variable analysis. You will need to consider what factors may influence the 1-year returns, but this will be completed within the following section. Again, start with an introduction sentence to introduce this section, followed by a description of the data. For this type of data, you will need to include a histogram to visually show the distribution of returns. Below the histogram, you would begin to discuss the key features. Generally, a good summary of features will include things like the average, standard deviation, lowest value, highest value, variation, and shape. It is also useful to note the modal class. The features then need to be put in context and linked to real life. A good concluding sentence for this section is to have a lead in to the next section. For example, something like, in the next section of the report, factors which may influence the returns, such as investment type, will be examined. Moving on to factors influencing performance. So the next section should in fact contain several subsections. One to address each of the bivariate and trivariate relationships being considered. The same structure template can be used for each of the subsections. For this part of the report, you are looking to say whether the factor influences the 1-year returns, and so this type of comment can be a good concluding sentence within each subsection. The conclusion? Well, your final section will be a conclusion section. As conclusions should be drawn within each section and subsection of the report, the final conclusion section will only be fairly small and is really just an opportunity to quickly recap on the major findings so as to remind the reader what they should be taking away from the report. No recommendations are required. And lastly, the appendix. So after the conclusion section, you will include your appendix. I mentioned earlier that you would need an outlier appendix. Generally, this is the only appendix that should appear within your report, as anything important, including tables and charts, should be within the report itself. If you do find that you have something extra that you want to include as an appendix, that is okay, but please keep in mind that the report should be able to be read without looking to any appendices, and so it is vital that all of your findings and conclusions go inside the report itself. That's it for this help session. The next recording will be to discuss the outlier analysis.